to started in the essence of time and in order to make sure that those who are here have an opportunity to be heard. We're grateful for your presence and your willingness to provide input. I'm going to begin the meeting, if I could, ask Senator Jones if he would open us with prayer.
Bow our heads, please. Thank you, Father, for bringing us together today to do the people's business in the state of Georgia, and give us the wisdom and courage to do what is best in your name, in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Senator. We have three bills we'd like to learn more about today. Consideration for Senate Resolution 148, Senate Bill 179, and then Senate Bill 535. These are hearing-only bills because we want to make sure that the authors have a chance to express their intent and answer questions from the committee. Again, we have other members of the committee that are on their way, and I hope they can join us soon. But I want to defer now and ask Senator McLaurin if he would come and provide input on Senate Resolution 148.
Thank you very much. All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and senators who are in attendance today, for hearing Senate Resolution 148. This is sort of a companion piece to Senate Bill 179, which is also on the agenda today. And both of these bills address a policy known in Georgia and elsewhere as felony disenfranchisement. The reason there's two pieces of legislation is because currently Georgia law enshrines this policy both in the Constitution in terms of who is eligible to vote in Georgia and also in the code, as you know. I wanted to bring this bill today really to have a conversation, and I'm very grateful to the chairman and to majority leadership for agreeing to this conversation today. We have had conversations like Senator Jones's bill, which I think it's a great companion piece also to be discussing my bills today, because we're talking about different approaches to the same issue, which is, what is felony disenfranchisement? How is it serving Georgia? And if we were to reform or change the policy in any way, how would we think about doing it? The reason that my bills completely eliminate felony disenfranchisement, which is what they do, is because I think it tees up this conversation to be about why do we have the policy in the first place. And then I think, if I'm lucky enough to get y'all to agree even a little bit that we need to look at the policy, then we start talking to Senator Jones about how in practice we might think about changing that policy as we move forward. But very quickly, and if I'm being redundant, wave your hand at me. The policy of felony disenfranchisement in this country is really a product of the last 150 years. It is old, but it's not older than the Civil War. It is a response to the Civil War. It is well known and a sordid, unfortunate aspect of American history that after the Civil War and after the question of slavery was decided, there were a lot of newly freed black people who were trying to enter into society and be citizens on equal terms. And this was the whole point of what we call Reconstruction. Unfortunately, a lot of states, and not just southern states, states like New York did this as well, states around the country, it adopted two types of policies at the same time in the late 1800s. The first was a widespread new net of crimes, new felonies, that wrapped people up in criminal liability. And the way that we think about felonies now is a little more nuanced. Back then, it was what we would consider today to be misdemeanors, petty theft, that sort of thing, that were being turned into felonies really for the express purpose of keeping people down. There were felonies like being unemployed. Being unemployed was a felony in some of these codes, right? So it's really a dramatic expansion of criminal liability, even relative to what we consider to be the line for felonies today. And then the second policy, of course, was felony disenfranchisement. The combination of those two policies meant that newly freed black individuals who were newly enjoying their constitutional rights to vote and be equal citizens were having it just as quickly snatched away because there were a lot of people who were not ready for that kind of change. And so that policy has persisted for 150 years. The faces of that policy have changed somewhat. There are people of every race and background who are caught up in felony disenfranchisement, unable to vote as a result of their convictions. But I wanted to bring the roots of that policy to our attention today because at the end of the day, the philosophy that I bring, to your attention today for your consideration is, if you're a citizen, you should be able to vote. The right to vote adheres to citizenship. and nothing about committing a felony, as heinous as some of the felonies that are committed might be. There's nothing about it that makes you less of a citizen who is an equal citizen with everybody else. We are the only modern democracy in the world that disenfranchises people on the basis of felony convictions the way that we do. The United States is unquestionably the most aggressive and regressive on this issue. There are some countries, I'll be candid with you, there are some countries that will do very narrow, limited felony disenfranchisement on the basis of very specific categories of crimes. Crimes like being a traitor or election fraud, right? Crimes where the idea of voting is somehow related to the offense that a person commits. And you can go back to ancient Greece, and there are, again, very limited examples of felony disenfranchisement. What those countries then and now don't have is this broad sweeping net of taking away voting rights for every single felony, and doing so with the 150-year history of specifically targeting Black Americans. And so that is a high-level overview of what felony disenfranchisement is. There have been discussions about moral turpitude, this phrase that exists in the Constitution and Code, and that, this idea of moral turpitude, it's vague, right? What does it mean? That this is some kind of a bar that can separate between the really bad felonies and the good felony. I mean, not that there's a good felony, but the bad felonies and the worst felonies, right? That is one way that you could think about attacking this policy issue. But the reason I came today with the whole enchilada to get rid of the policy entirely is because I think rather than, this is just my view and others can reasonably disagree, but rather than attack that phrase, moral turpitude, and get in the weeds on which felonies are this and which felonies are that, I think that it's a useful reflection to think about the whole policy, why we have it, whether it serves us, and whether the people who, again, are suffering under, whether it's bad prison conditions or just all the various issues that go with reentry and trying to be equal citizens, whether those folks should have an equal voice in our democracy altogether. So I will not belabor the point any further. I know there are some speakers who have signed up in support of the bill. Some of the speakers are issue experts, and I think some have had personal experiences being on the wrong side of this issue. But I am so grateful again that the committee is willing to hear their voices and reflect on these issues today.
Thank you. I appreciate the input. Just for clarification and edification, currently, how many states have similar constitutional restrictions?
I'm not clear on the constitutional versus statutory one. What I can tell you is since 1997, I think there's something like 26 states and the District of Columbia have made moves to reform these policies. And so obviously just based on that number alone, there were a lot of states, a majority of states in this country that adopted that kind of posture.
Adopted some kind of restriction.
Precisely.
Either constitutionally or statutorily.
Precisely.
Now, in your case, this is a Senate resolution for a constitutional amendment. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
So in order for Georgia to do what you would like to propose, it would require that CA. Is that correct?
2/3 vote, and the voters would have to agree, sir.
I hear you. Very good. Questions from the committee? Senator Robertson.
Senator McLaurin, it's good to see you as always. Congratulations. I was out of the chamber the other day and I heard you won an award, and I'm very proud of you. Since you and I are classmates and came in here together, I take pride in that.
As do I.
Yeah. Do convicted felons not have the right to vote in Georgia today?
So the Georgia law is not the most restrictive in the country, but it is quite restrictive. If you are convicted of a felony and sentenced, during the completion of that sentence, you do not have the right to vote, because we've gotten official guidance from courts, the AG, that any felony essentially is a felony of moral turpitude, and there's no clear right to vote that has been protected for people who are serving active felony sentences.
So while I appreciate that, can convicted felons vote in Georgia today?
People who have served their sentence and have gotten their rights restored after completion of the sentence can vote.
Okay, I'm not going to ask it the third time.
Okay.
Convicted felons can vote in Georgia today.
Some who have felony convictions, yes.
Yes. Anybody who has had a felony conviction and has completed their sentence,
correct,
can vote in Georgia today. And the process of reclaiming that right is almost automatic through the process. Now, some of my colleagues may be frustrated that they don't have the same right to go out and purchase a firearm after they've completed their sentence. But here in Georgia today, convicted felons can vote. And as far as the moral turpitude side, and I know that when you said it, I smiled, because in the past individuals have made light of that phrase. myself and Senator Jones have dealt with it. And if you look into Georgia code, moral turpitude is like kudzu. It's all through there. And when I was hazed coming into the Senate, that somebody asked me if I knew what moral turpitude was, and I did, thanks to my criminal justice education, and talked about the mores of the community and the accepted behaviors and things of this nature, which I agree with you are not necessarily defined at all times, but are fairly clear. It's acceptable behavior within the community, and anything that is not acceptable. And when I say acceptable, and I talk about the mores and norms, I'm talking about those that are codified in law in most cases. So, so if I'm hearing you right, your resolution, you would want a CA that would allow an individual who has been convicted of any felony, who may be sitting in Jackson, Georgia, on death row or serving a life sentence, they would have the right to vote.
That's exactly
based
right.
on this.
And internationally, we're completely on an island. Germany has law that requires prison administrators to facilitate voting by people held in custody.
Right.
Because again,
And we have that here too. An individual sitting in a county jail charged with a felony can still vote. And the sheriff's office in the agency I worked in, we were required to make sure that those individuals who received their absentee ballots went through the entire process. And you say we're on an island in the world, but do Palestinians have the right to vote?
I mean, I think that's a loaded question.
No, it's not a loaded question. It's an actual question, because there are several countries that prohibit. So we are not the Lone Ranger out here. I say now, while some others may have different rules, there are those certain groups that are worse than anybody. And I'm not just talking about the country I mentioned. I'm talking about other countries too, to where their citizens aren't afforded many of the rights that Germany, the United States, and others provide when it comes to electing leaders and being able to step out and express who they want to serve them. So I just want to be clear. While I agree with you, we are different than some countries. Absolutely, and Georgia is different from some states. There are egregious examples that we're way beyond and do a lot better on, I think.
Well, I mean, I said modern democracies for a reason, because my assumption is that's the level of openness, transparency, equal rights, justice that we aspire to. If the will of the General Assembly is to meet a standard that is only some of the most authoritarian or regressive countries in the world, I can't stop that. But I'm saying if we want to aspire to be like our peers economically, in terms of equal rights and justice globally, we are on an island in that respect. And there are actually some surprising countries. I've got a list on my phone that I'll pull out later for you, but there are some surprising countries that are less regressive than we are on this. I think that, one of the things I like to stress too, because I talk about prison conditions a lot, is if the people in those prisons can't vote, that's one less incentive for elected representatives up here to pay attention to the issues. And it would be fascinating to see how our General Assembly would respond if you did have voting rights for people in those facilities. I think you might see just the natural market forces move toward elected representatives taking some of those issues and really carrying them into this building more zealously. So this is the whole, again, we talk about victims, we talk about, the way that the criminal legal system already gives second chances to people, but this is the last line of defense. This is the right to vote. It secures every other right, and we penalize people in the system in so many ways. To me, this is the one hard line that says, at the end of the day, no matter how offensive the crime, you are still a citizen, you are still a first-class citizen on equal rights with everybody else on a playing field, and we will punish you from every way from here to Sunday for your felony, but we can't take away your citizenship.
Thank you, Senator Robertson. Quick follow-up. Right now, for a convicted felon to reclaim their voting privileges, they must complete their sentence. Is that correct?
Correct. And that includes
and
everything.
they also have to complete any restitution. Is that correct?
Any condition of the sentence has to be completely so the bar is already pretty high for being able to get the rights back. And again, I haven't even really gone into sort of the poverty aspect of any of this stuff today. I've mostly been focusing on late 1800s racial legal dynamics at that time. But to the chairman's point, it is a bar that anybody would have to clear that's financial included to be able to get these rights back now.
Do you feel that it is appropriate for a convicted felon to have the right to vote for judicial appointments who would have oversight of their cases?
I do, in the same way that we all vote for people who have a direct say on how our rights and responsibilities are administered. I think that the thing and the politics of this issue are tough. We wouldn't be here having the conversation we are if it weren't really tough politics. But what I will say is that for me, and this is personal, when I look at the late 1800s, when I look at the context in which this policy was developed and how on an island we are with it, it is impossible for me to come to any other conclusion except, we've got to be able to justify this policy in terms that aren't explicitly post-Civil War racial. And I don't know that we've got a policy justification. I know some of the speakers today will speak to how it's better for public safety when you give people a stake in their democracy. Because it's not just about the physical freedom to move around and get a job. It's about how you feel about your relationship to the country you live in. And if we want people to be successful when they re-enter society, when they try to make it and have a second chance, it means the world to them. And I'm not in a position to tell you that. There are people in this room who will tell you that. But it means the world to them that their country says you are a citizen with equal rights under the law at the most basic level. And so that's that kind of reaffirmation that they're part of the community in that most basic sense is statistically correlated with their success when they re-enter into society.
One more question, Senator Robertson.
Senator, you went back to the 1800s, and I just want to be clear. You're a educated attorney. You may know this. Hasn't this law been challenged many times since then?
I'm not arguing that it's legally unconstitutional.
No, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
I'm asking, hasn't this law been challenged many times since the 1800s?
I mean, people have been talking about this since then, for sure.
And I know there's been case law. I think there was a case law out of Florida several years ago that wanted to define what the sentence was, and this kind of stuff. So while I agree with you, it's been a part of the conversation since the 1800s. The courts and everybody else have looked at this. Courts all over this country have looked at this, and in many cases land right back to where we are, based on testimony from those for it and those against it. And to something the chairman said, I think we all vote for somebody that we may end up in front of one day wearing a black robe. So I do agree with you on that point. We just not allowed to tell them that we voted for them, but I do agree with you.
Oh, the Christmas tree is lighting up. Senator Jones.
But even though they're not dealing with it from a constitutional standpoint, isn't it accurate that Florida, they actually came to where we are now, where they were so backwards, but Alabama's also tried to deal with it as far as defining moral turpitude. So it's not a constitutional standpoint, but I guess the key question is persons are now starting to look at it. So wouldn't it be in our purview in Georgia to take a second look at, as our surrounding states are now taking a second look at their laws too?
Completely. I mean, Senator, to your point, I think that a lot of people who look at this, even if publicly the politics are what they are, a lot of people look at this policy and say, we know where this came from. And we know that there's a real issue with keeping it on the books the way that it is on the books. But different states have had different conversations about how far to run and how fast on trying to achieve better justice with this set of policies. And so, for me, that I'm not expecting in the year of our Lord 2024 for, all of Georgia's senators and reps to link arms and walk forward 2 miles on this issue. But I think it is really important for, if you want to link arms, I'm happy to link arms with you and walk. I figure it may not be on this issue, but I do think the more we talk about it, and that's what's so critical, is to have this conversation. That is going to be what spurs people to at least reflect on, well, what would I be comfortable with? How much movement would I be willing to do? And it's hard when you listen to the stories of people who experience this firsthand and touch this issue. It's hard to hear those stories and not want to do anything.
One last question, because I do want to get to the individuals who are here to make input. Senator Harvey?
I am assuming that you believe that punishment is for crime is an appropriate answer. Am I correct?
I believe that prisons and police should exist. I know a lot of people who are voting for me are not happy to hear that, but no, I mean, I'm serious though that we need a system that can keep the public safe from people who commit crimes. What I'm saying today with this piece of legislation, right, is that we already punish people in so many ways, and we make their lives so hard to rebuild after they make a huge mistake, that, you know, it's not like if we were to reform this policy or change this policy that we'd be making the system less punitive, right? That retribution is still in place.
But here's the issue: we do punish people for crimes that they commit, and the inability to vote is part of that punishment. From that standpoint, is just a part of it, because what we've said is that once they finish their sentencing, they do whatever they're supposed to do with that, from a restitution standpoint, whatever, they can then vote. Correct?
That's the current law, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's right.
So I mean, they've done the deed, whatever the deed is. They've been punished for it. Once they satisfy that sentencing or whatever that requirement is, then they're back to where they can do it. And I mean, I don't know of any other system that. I mean, you've got to have some constraints of losing something. If you lose nothing, is there. So that was part I just don't understand. Is I believe that crime should not pay, and there should be a price to pay. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator, would you like to briefly go over the Senate bill that goes with this?
Sure. Senate bill.
That way we can, when we get into testimony,
Right,
they
it'll
can
be
address both issues.
Combined.
Is that all right?
That's exactly right. Senate Bill 179 does the exact same thing as SR 148, but just in the OCGA, the code, as opposed to the Constitution. And all it does is strike the felony of moral turpitude language from the code, so that it is no longer a disability that disqualifies. That disability is the legal term for what makes you ineligible to vote in the code and the Constitution. So it takes that away, so that when you're convicted of a felony, that is no longer an obstacle to registering to vote and voting.
Very good. Well, I want to go ahead and move to some input
Please.
from those who have joined us today. We are going to try to do this judiciously, if we can, fairly quickly. I appreciate those who are here and who are coordinating this. I'm going to start with Ms. Battles, if you would please, and then we'll do a couple 3 minutes each, and then as we get through this, we'll come back to have a conversation. Okay, Ms. Battles, and then after that, Ms. Dukes.
Committee, thank you so much for making this hearing today. My name is Cindy Battles, and I am the Policy Director for the Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda. I think Senator McLaurin did a great job of talking about the history of this and the moral turpitude. I just want to point out that before we started passing moral turpitude laws to disenfranchise formerly enslaved people, the only law where you lost your right to vote was treason, and we saw how obvious they were about what they were doing when people were willing to be on the record and say things like, if you have a convention, I'll make you a constitution by which the black people will never be heard of. By the way, that was Robert Toombs in the AJC in 1876. Moral turpitude was added to the Constitution in 1877. That messaging changed, right? It all of a sudden became not okay to say things like that. So we had the Southern strategy, and the messaging became tough on crime. In the state of Georgia, we keep people on parole and probation longer than just about any other state. So we disenfranchise people longer than just about any other state. And losing the right to vote was never actually about consequences or punishment. It was always about disenfranchisement. It was always about losing the power one has as a citizen. And I watched when my dad came home after he was released from prison, and he owned a home, and he put his kids in public school, and he went to work, and he was supposed to be what this body would call a fine, upstanding citizen. He had no voice in his government whatsoever. He had no voice in property or how his children were schooled or any of those kind of things. And SCOTUS has said we can't involuntarily take away citizenship from a citizen. That was in 1967. So that is why, as much as I wanted the men who put me in the hospital for 2 weeks to face consequences, I firmly believe they still had the right to vote. Because, and again, I understand that this has been upheld, but segregation was upheld. Our values and our philosophies on the laws change, and it is time that our values and our philosophies about these laws change. We have come to a place where we know it is not okay to disenfranchise people, and we have looked at our history and said, hey, this isn't okay. Let's do this thing. Let's change the messaging. Not voting is not a punishment. Again, it's about disconnection from the community, and the thing about that is connection to the community has been shown to reduce recidivism. So by not giving folks that connection, we're literally feeding into the prison population. Okay, thank you so much for listening to me. I thank you for listening to my friends who are coming after me. I thank you to Senator McLaurin. I know this is a difficult conversation. Whew, thanks for that warning.
Hanifa.
State your name, please, and share with us your input.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paige Dukes. Thank you, Senator McLaurin, for bringing this bill. Thank you, members of the Senate Ethics Committee, for hearing it. As I mentioned, my name is Paige Dukes. I'm here representing All of Us or None Georgia. We are a grassroots civil and human rights organization fighting for the rights of formerly and currently incarcerated people and our families. I myself am a formerly incarcerated woman. I went to prison when I was 20 years old. I'm now 37. At that time, when I was sentenced, a year after my incarceration, I spent a year at the Fulton County Jail. My judge said her hands were tied by the law because of the mandatory minimum sentencing laws. She could see that I had been clean for a year, had turned my life around, but because of the crime that I committed, I went to prison and served 10 years and was released when I was 30 years old. I am, as I mentioned, a person in long-term recovery, have not taken a drink or a drug in over 16 years. And more recently, I'm a Georgia voter. In the fall of 2020, I petitioned the court to terminate my probation early and was able to vote for the first time in my life. Earlier that year, I attended a Senate study committee where I met some of you for the first time. And I asked you, Senator Robertson, do you think I should be able to elect my lawmakers? To which you replied, you can. I don't look like a person who was incarcerated for 10 years. But we don't all look the same. We don't all vote the same. And regardless of our politics, we do need our legislators to represent us and our interests, as you would any other constituent. 12 of 14 members on this committee has at least one prison facility in your district, so which means that between you, you represent a large number of currently incarcerated people who are blanketly excluded from decisions that affect all of our lives. There is a false dichotomy often between people who commit crimes and people who are survivors of violence. I myself was a survivor of violence before I ever went to prison, and I was also a person who committed a serious violent felony. Most people who go to prison have been survivors of violence or trauma of some sort, either before or during their prison sentences. Chairman Burns, I was incarcerated at Emmanuel in your district, where the head of security at that facility was sentenced in 2018 for forcing women to perform sexual acts, women who were not heard or believed until years later after they were released. Almost, like I mentioned, almost every single person has been victimized, and no one deserves to be silenced, abused, or neglected, regardless of their charges. When there are, outbreaks of Legionnaires, H. pylori at our prisons, and people don't have access to clean drinking water, if their representative says, my constituents don't care about this issue, does that mean he doesn't see those people as his constituents? This in itself is moral turpitude, and until we have oversight of our prisons, we need our representatives to represent us. People in Georgia serve longer sentences of probation or parole than anywhere else, the civil death of incarceration lasting long after our sentences are served. And until we all count, we cannot expect our voices to be heard or any of our rights to be upheld. These rights have nothing to do with our charges, and none of us is more deserving or morally superior to another, and none of us should count any less than any one of you. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your survival of a tough situation. I appreciate your input. Thank you. Karima Hanfer? Karima? Please share your input.
Greetings. Thank you for an opportunity to let my voice be heard in this space. My name is Karima Hanifa. I am an Atlanta native. At the age of 15, I was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences in the state of Georgia. My crime happened 31 years ago. After serving 26 years at the Georgia Department of Corrections, I was released back into community, where in my attempt to receive a driver's license, an alert popped up that asked me if I would like to register to vote as a part of the Georgia license process. After I checked the box, there was another alert that told me that it was against the law to register to vote if I was currently on probation or parole in the state of Georgia, in which I immediately began to back out in fear of reoffending. As someone who is directly impacted by the criminal justice system and who went in before my frontal lobe was developed in the last 5 years, I know it to be true that successful reentry is possible. There's a statistic that says that most people reoffend within the first 3 years. I have had 0 reoffenses. I believe that I have not reoffended because I am actively enrolled in community, through which I'm able to provide resources for or in marginalized communities, as well as I'm a student working on my master's at Life University in Marietta. I am, however, required to pay taxes every time I purchase something, which keeps me in a box where I'm constantly reminded that while I am required to pay taxes here in the state of Georgia every time I purchase something every year on my vehicle, that I am not allowed to participate in Georgia's democracy, where there are people who I believe their values, their vision value mine, but I am not able to vote for them. And I always encourage people not to necessarily vote for people because they look like you, but because their values mirror your own. And in this process, I find it difficult to be viewed as safe enough to live in community, but not safe enough to participate in community. When we talk about sentencing, I am on parole for the duration of my life, so I am disenfranchised for the remainder of my life for something that happened when I was 15. I understand that there are victims of crime. I also understand that there are instances where when things happen, they cannot be undone. And I deal with that every single day. But I would like to participate in the system that I live in.
Thank you for your input. And again, thank you for your courage.
Thank you.
Proud of people who are like you, who come through this terrible challenge, and you're on the other side. That's wonderful. Thank you. And we're going to move along. Mr. Askew, Wade Askew. Mr. Askew.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Wade Askew. I'm the Policy Director at Georgia Justice Project. We're a nonprofit located here in Atlanta, but we serve Georgians across the state. Most folks know us for our legal and social services on behalf of folks who are living with an old arrest or conviction record, who are now trying to break through barriers so that they can reach their employment goals, their family goals, their housing goals, whatever those may be. I just want to highlight 2 quick elements of this discussion. First, the scale of disenfranchisement in the state of Georgia, and then second, the role of civic engagement and specifically voting in reentry. So first, Georgia has a perfectly average crime rate as compared to the rest of the states in the country. We are number 26 when it comes to our crime rate. That jives with my personal experience. I don't think Georgians are especially criminal as compared to anyone else. Despite that, we actually have the highest rate of correctional control in the country. That is mostly driven by our probation rate, our felony probation rate, which is triple the national average. And I know that this legislature has worked on that issue in the past few years alongside us. As a result, what our voting policy is combined with our rate of correctional control, what that yields is the 9th highest disenfranchisement rate in the country. And so we rank ahead of multiple states who actually impose post-sentence barriers on folks who have a felony conviction, despite the fact that we do not. By pure volume, we disenfranchise the 7th most people in the country on the basis of a felony conviction, an estimated 234,000 people as of 2022. And so we've heard from others as to the impact that that has on an individual level. At a much broader level, disenfranchisement has implications on public safety and successful reentry. So studies have shown that voting, among other pro-social activities, drives down recidivism. It drives down criminal conduct. This is because voting is a key part to folks feeling like they are a full part of their community, and we know that tight community bonds lead to less risk of reoffense. So SB 179 is very rightly considered first and foremost through the lens of civil rights. However, I do just want to highlight that, especially considering our scale of disenfranchisement, it's also important to consider it through the lens of public safety, because the right to vote has public safety implications for all Georgians in driving down recidivism and promoting successful reentry. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. We are grateful. Otero? Ms. Otero?
Good afternoon, Chairman, and good afternoon to the members of the committee. I am Isabel Otero. I am the Georgia Policy Director for the Southern Poverty Law Center and the SPLC Action Fund. And I just want to thank the chairman and majority leadership again, as Senator McLaurin said, for even having this discussion. I think it's important. I'm glad that you've been able to hear from some of the members of the various coalitions that are in the state. I have the honor of working with these folks every single week on a variety of issues. I come before you all the time to talk about criminal justice issues, especially. And I just want to echo what a lot of the folks have said, right? This is, you can look at this through the lens of just recidivism, through public health, through just civil rights, voting rights. There's a variety of ways to look at this issue and conclude that we do want people to have a stake in their community. And if you are out, like Karima said, if you're out in the community to complete the rest of your sentence, you're out paying taxes, you're a member of your community, you should have a say in your government. And I think that's the conversation that we're all wanting to have with you all. I want to offer my help and my organization's help in figuring out if there is a place for us to get to some compromise here, right? Or somewhere where we can start to undo this process. Because as Senator McLaurin has said, this is a historic problem, right? This is a systemic issue, and we want to address it, and we think we can find some common ground with all of you. And I just want to, again, thank you all for your time and offer my support as we move forward into next year to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your input. That concludes those who wanted to speak on SB 179. Ms. Dukes, you're also signed up for the resolution.
I think we're just...
Are you okay with that?
Are you okay?
And again, I would like to ask Mr. Riley, Tony Riley, are you here?
Oh, wait, I was signed up to speak
on both bills. Yes, and you're welcome to speak on both bills. We're running short of time. We're going to shortchange Senator Jones here.
That's the one that they wanted to speak on. I'm sorry, Chairman. That
Okay, so that was the one. Okay, 535. Thank you. All right. Any further questions from the committee? I want to thank Senator McLaurin. As everyone in this audience knows, he's championed this issue. This is not his first rodeo to say, consider this. We're grateful for that. I'm most grateful for those who came today and shared their personal engagement in the challenges that this creates. So, absolutely, certainly. Senator Roberts.
My good friend, and I think and it helped me out, 15th Amendment, right? Talks about reasons we cannot disenfranchise individuals that vote. And those three reasons were race, religion, in position of former servitude, I think, if I'm remembering it correctly. And it's a right in this country that was put there in the 1870s. So while I appreciate the history, I think we have to be careful and make sure that we capture all of the history. That, as I said before, these cases have been tried and judgments have been, or challenged. These laws have been challenged and courts have decided. But I think we've accomplished a lot since slavery. I think we're a much more diverse South than we've ever been. And so I just think it's important that we include all the facts, that we have taken this up as a country, and that the U.S. Supreme Court has made decisions, and that if you're a person of color, if you're a person of a particular faith, or if you're a person who at one time was enslaved in this country and you are no longer enslaved, those three things cannot prevent you from voting. And explicitly it said this was about voting. And so I just think in remembering this was done in the late 1800s, I think is important to inject into the conversation. And I look forward to carrying on our conversation.
And thank you for that comment and your openness to the discussion. Thanks again to you, Mr. Chairman. My only concluding remark in response to that would just be, I think, everybody is always outraged at illegal discrimination, but the thing that the politics are much harder on is when we've adopted legal discrimination. When we've enshrined discrimination that has those roots in that time period in the law, it makes it that much more difficult for us to confront what's happening and have the conversation necessary to move on it. So I want to echo the chairman too. Thanks for the courage that people came today, and they will, I'm sure, continue to display that courage in any conversations we have moving forward. Thank you again.
Thank you. I'm going to defer to Senator Jones. We're trying to determine if we got a hard stop at 2:00. It won't be that long. Well, I'll be happy to entertain your presentation from here or there, or I'm happy to reschedule it at your discretion.
No, it was basically the same stuff.
All right. Thanks, Senator Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is SB 535, which has actually been coming up before. And so in reality, I think, just to go through it, we started this conversation really, and I know Senator McLaurin, former Representative McLaurin, has been doing this too, but in the Senate, we had a study committee that Chairman Robertson actually chaired, and we went kind of through this, and we had different angles to actually approach it. And so number one, I think we have three choices. First, we could do the constitutional amendment and just completely get rid of it. And I have no issue with that, quite frankly. Number two, you could do what I did in SB 79 a couple of years ago, and that is actually kind of say a list of crimes would not be moral turpitude. Or then you also have SB 535, which is basically deals with drug offenses not being a crime of moral turpitude. But I think the bottom line is it's time really, as we get ready to go for next year, to move on something, quite frankly. If we want to go all and just try to do everything and put a constitutional amendment, that's perfectly fine. But if the appetite is a little bit different, there are other options out there too. And so SB 535 is just one of those particular options that exists. And I think one of the problems with this is that we look at when we give a sentence, we look at telling somebody to go get a job, telling them to take care of their kids is like punishment. But we can't tell them to vote, so we say, well, that will be your punishment. You can't vote. So it shouldn't be looked at as punishment. When you're on probation and you give somebody probation, you're actually trying to integrate them back into society. When you're asking them to go get a job, that makes them a better citizen. But a lot of times we look at it like the judge says, you better go get a job, as though he's punishing you. No, that's actually something you should do to become part of the citizenry. Well, you also should be able to vote too, to make sure you're part of the citizenry. So it's just very interesting that the persons that we're not declining to vote, give the right to vote back to, we tell them they have to get a job. They have to take care of their children. They have to, pay their taxes. And if you don't do those things, then it might be a separate crime, or certainly it could be a violation of your probation and you go to jail. So we want them to do everything to be a citizen, but we don't want them to vote. And so 535 is just saying that this is one of those options that are out there. But I think the overall conversation should be, if we're actually telling persons, these are the things you need to do to be a productive citizen. And we want you to do all these things to bring you back into society. So you're smart enough, you're mature enough to get a job. You're smart enough, you're mature enough, even though you're on felony probation. Of course, we're not talking about somebody necessarily on sex offender registry. We want you to go be a coach for your little league team. These are things that you would go back and tell the judge if you wanted to end your probation early. You would say, Judge, I'm out there with my son or my daughter, and I'm coaching the little league. Judge, I have a job. All these things we want these people to do. We want them to integrate into society. But we say, you know what? You're not good enough to vote. And it's just inconsistent, and it really just doesn't, to me, it just doesn't make any logical sense, because we want them to do all these things but not vote, which is the number one aspect of being a citizen. So I would say that in reality, we're not on opposite sides. It's just, I don't know what the appetite is of this particular legislature at this particular time, and that's why I just presented SB 535, especially when you talk about drug offenses, when the new buzzword is it's basically more of a disease in recovery. If it's a disease in recovery, certainly that person ought to be allowed to vote. If that's how if we're really serious about that and saying that basically drug offenses is more of a disease and not a crime. So that's my presentation.
Just one question, I'll
Yes, sir.
turn to Senator Estevez. On line 18 and 19, you indicate that those are not felony convictions involving moral turpitude relating to the purchase, possession, manufacture, distribution, or sale.
Right.
So we're saying a dealer.
Well, that can become kind of, yes, I guess you would say that.
So we would give a dealer who has served their prison sentence.
Well, they may not actually go to prison, but when you're
But
saying
it's not a misdemeanor, is it?
No, it's not a misdemeanor. It's actually a felony. But they're probably not going to go to jail, quite frankly. But let's kind of break it down when you're talking about a dealer.
Okay.
And this is where it becomes such kind of murky. A person can actually have less than misdemeanor possession and be charged with possession with intent to distribute. And it may not necessarily that distributed. And I can tell you, when I was doing defense work, I actually had someone who bagged their marijuana. It was less than an ounce. And they bagged it differently because it was different flavors. And the prosecutor charged them as being a dealer, a distributor. And we were able to knock that charge down because the prosecutor looked into it, and it was right. They were different flavors, and it was like, yeah, okay, he's not trying to mix them up. But it was actually less than an ounce. You're not even going to sell that. It was actually less than an ounce. So that becomes a situation where you're talking about prosecutors necessarily, good people, but they can overcharge in cases like that. And so to me, err on the side of caution. And same thing, when you start talking about marijuana, it's how something's bagged. You start talking about other drugs. If you have a certain amount of money in your pocket, a person may charge you with actually trying to deal.
But
And you're not actually a dealer at all.
Is it not true a controlled substance is cocaine?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so
yes.
I can deal in cocaine, and what you're saying is restore voting rights.
I would say yes. I would say the person that actually has been caught and basically now is on felony probation, and it's a question about whether a person can be in jail and it's a question we have to wrestle with. Should a person in jail be able to do it because of safety reasons? Should they not? These are questions we should wrestle with, but I think the thing is we ought to actually start wrestling with it and not just say, oh, well, we've charged you now with possession with intent. That's it. You cannot vote. Because there are different levels of intent, even when you start talking about something like cocaine and things of that nature. It could be a very small amount. And if you get the wrong prosecutor, you're going to be charged with possession with intent to distribute and not with just simple possession. And that can be a total change. You can have somebody's prescription drugs in your car. That's a felony. They could charge you with possession with intent to distribute. So I think that we really have to have these conversations in a much more, when we have more time to understand that even though you're saying a person's a dealer, it may not actually be the type of person that you think that it is. And the key thing is you're going to tell that dealer, go get a job. You're going to tell that dealer, take care of your kids. If that dealer has to go pay child support, that judge is going to say, you better take care of your kids, but you can't vote. That's inconsistent to me.
Well, I will say good news is we don't have to vacate the room at 2 o'clock, so we can run a little over, and that's helpful.
Okay,
I want to
yes.
recognize Senator Estevez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Jones and Senator McLaurin, for bringing these bills. I think it's powerful, the testimony that we've heard so far about the notion that there's a sense of punishment that continues even after someone has served, quote, their time. And to your point, Senator, they are now being asked to participate in society. They're asked to pay taxes. They're asked to be productive and get a job, but yet they can't, for whatever reason, be given full participation in that in our society. And what that does is it's really an added on sentence, added on punishment that is not discussed.
100%. And that's the key, because they ought to have some type of punishment. But this person that you said had to have some type of punishment, you're trusting them to go do all these other things that make you a product of society, but you don't trust them to actually go cast a ballot, and that's just very interesting. And we will have all sorts of programs where we'll bring those persons in, and we'll say they're working now, they're clean, they're great, and people will cry and people will talk about how great this is. But guess what? You still can't vote because you're on paper. It's just not right.
Right.
Thank you. I recognize Senator from Columbus.
Thank you, Senator Jones. Now, Senator Jones, you brought up the disease. The disease is actually addiction, right? Is the disease. The sale of drugs is not a disease. Would you agree with that?
Not necessarily, because sometimes you have a person who's actually addicted.
Well,
who's actually just selling.
but
because of
that's
that.
addiction, and the addiction is without a question, I believe, a disease. I mean, talking to addictionologists, whether it's alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, several things, addiction is a disease, and in the way it's written in the legislation, we're not talking about individuals who are relating to the purchase, possession, manufacture, distribution, or sale of controlled substances. And while I agree with you, there are these anomalies where the individual repackaged it because of the different flavors and stuff. Then I could see that. But in many cases, they buy pounds, repackage it into sellable portions, and go out there because the average Joe Schmo is not going to come up and buy a pound of weed or a half a pound of weed on the street for use. And just as a point of clarification from the three things in the 15th Amendment that was adopted in 1870 were race, color, and previous condition of servitude, to ensure that those three things did not prevent a citizen of the United States from voting. So I just want to be clear on that. But you and I have been having this conversation for several years, and I think if there's anybody, I can't think of anybody I'd rather continue to have the conversation with than you, and I appreciate you working on this.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Harbin.
Just curious, statistical data. Were any of these people, and y'all may know this, were they voting prior to being incarcerated, or is it after they were incarcerated they decided they needed to vote? I'm just curious, is that, bear with me as I meet people all the time who never vote or didn't vote, and I'm kind of going, okay. And then I guess my question would be, do we know statistically, were these people who are incarcerated voting prior to being incarcerated, or are they only wanting to vote after they've been incarcerated? I don't know if you've got any statistical data on that.
I don't have that data. But we also have to remember that when we talk about this felony disenfranchisement, we're not necessarily talking about just incarceration. We're talking about persons that we actually placing on probation who are disenfranchised. And that becomes where it really starts getting very murky and not making much sense. Because here is a judge who has decided they can go back into society. They're not being incarcerated at all. So a judge is saying, no, you're fine to go back, no matter what the charge is. It could be selling, it could be drugs, it could be breaking and entering, whatever it may be. This court of law has said, I don't want to put you in jail. I'm going to send you back wherever you are. I'm going to put you back into the community. But you can't vote.
Yeah, and I have a friend who was incarcerated. He's a professional, very well trained in that respect, but he is on probation from that standpoint. And I think rather than looking at other things, is maybe looking at the probationary issues and how those are appointed or given might be a way to look at it. But I think that if they're not voting before and all at once they want to vote, okay, can I change the rules? I think that's another part that you have to ask, and that's really part of really citizenship. We don't do a real good job anywhere of teaching what is good citizenship, and I think that's another part we could work on.
Of course, they may have decided that they want to vote now. Once they go through the system, they're like, I need to vote.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I had dinner with him after being out. He said, this needs to be fixed. I said,
right.
You're finally interested in politics, and you've never been involved before. And after going through the system, he's decided that he needs to be involved. So you never know.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, Mr. Chairman. Okay, we're going to get some public input for this bill. Mr. Riley, if you would please join Senator Jones and share with us your input on SB 535.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Riley, and I'm here to support 575. I'm so happy to have heard your comment and your comment and your comment and your comment. I am a convicted felon. I ran for office before I became a convicted felon. I ran for office after I got out of prison. I was disenfranchised My charge, my moral turpitude was not in my indictment under the Fifth Amendment, and it was not proved to a jury under the Sixth Amendment. So I was punished for a crime that I was neither charged nor convicted of. So I like this bill. I was in sales. The lady come in the store, she's looking in the window, said, "How can I help you?" She said, "I'm just looking." I said, "You got to start somewhere." His bill starts somewhere. We are going to have to, if I was 35 years old or 33 years old, when I got out of prison, I could have gone to the Army. This country has engaged in several wars. I'm 66 years old. This country has engaged in several wars where we go to defend democracies all around this world. But right here in the United States, in the state of Georgia, we're not defending the democracy here for the citizens who served their time, and now you get out, and I can't vote for you, but you all going to make the laws that are going to decide my fate and how I function and live in this state as a citizen. Gentlemen, this has been going on a long time. Alabama is making some changes, and like you said, other states are making some changes. It's time for Georgia to make some changes. We are bragging, and I live in Chatham County. I drove up here today. I'm living in Chatham County where the Hyundai plant is going on, where we have the largest port, where Governor Kent and the senators from the United States come to Savannah and say, this is the greatest state to come work and live in. But how about for the convicted felon and one who has these moral turpitude charges? Is it good for us? I have a twit card on me that I had to get federal government to approve me to go on the Georgia port to work as a longshoreman. In Savannah, they got rid of the box. City council got rid of the box where you have to tell them whether you're a convicted felon or not before you can get a job. So I think this moral turpitude box needs to come out of this Constitution, give a lot of more folk a lot of chance to be productive citizens in this state, participate in the electoral process. You know, before my time is up, you know the most thing, more than the 25-year sentence that I received for a non-violent offense, which by the way was for a conspiracy to distribute cocaine. The most hurtful thing for me was that there was a black man, Barack Obama, was running for president, and I was locked up and couldn't vote. But I got out in 2011, and because of this moral turpitude and this disenfranchisement until I finished my supervised release, I could not vote for Barack Obama. That hurt me worse than the 25 years I served in prison. Thank y'all. Please pass this.
Quick question. Have your voting rights been restored?
Yes, my voting right has been restored. And on top of that, I ran for county commissioner in 2020.
In Chatham County.
In Chatham County, I ran for commissioner.
Where's the good senator for down I-16 tonight? Yeah. I think he's down I-16. I'm sorry.
I ran for county commissioner. I won the nomination. 2 weeks before election, somebody looked in the statute and said, "Oh, he can't win. He has a crime of moral turpitude." And my opponent, I got 11,533 votes. He got 3,200 something votes, and he was the one who got the seat.
Thank you for your input. All right, Ms. Dukes, would you share with us input on this bill, please? This will be our last presenter. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to take some more of your time, and thank you, Senator Jones, for being willing to wrestle with this topic. I mean, I signed up opposed to your bill, but I really am just want to gently push back that this is not the way to go about it. As I mentioned, I myself suffered from the disease of addiction and had several felonies, none of which were drug charges, because when I started using drugs at the age of 14, by the time I was 20, I had accrued a criminal record for trying to support my habit. And most of us who do struggle with addiction, with active addiction, very rarely only have drug possession charges. And one of the problems with Georgia's felony disenfranchisement law is the suppressive and intimidating factor that people don't know whether or not they have the right to vote. And when they go to register to vote, even if they have completed their sentence of probation, they may not know whether or not it is legal or whether they may be recriminalizing themselves by registering to vote, because it says right there on the voter registration form that if you have been convicted of a felony, you may be committing another felony by registering to vote. So the idea that we do need to do something about this is true. And when people come home from prison, then we should all have the right to vote. And then you would know for sure. If I'm no longer serving my custodial sentence, then I have the right to vote back. That would be a much more clear-cut issue. As it is, if you don't know which crimes are outlined in the specific code section, or if one of your charges might disqualify you, and then even if the registrar's office isn't communicating with GCIC, there may be be some confusion about whether somebody can or cannot vote. So I worry that taking this approach would actually not even really scratch the surface, and that we need to do more to get to the root of the problem of felony disenfranchisement.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. I'm grateful. I want to thank both authors, both Senator McLaurin and Senator Jones. This is a tough issue. We acknowledge that. It's going to take some challenging times to get us to where we are, to where maybe we should be in the near term or the long term. But this was a good opportunity for us to understand more clearly the challenges we face. And I would defer to the majority leader.
Can I ask one quick question of the whip? So I may have missed part of the conversation when I came in late. Sorry, I was in other meetings.
I know.
At some point, you get your rights restored, and you probably address that for drug charges or whatever, moral turpitude and all that. At what point would you support restoring people's gun rights after they've been convicted and served time?
I don't know. I mean, that's a totally separate issue, and it was one that I had not really started wrestling with, quite frankly. So I'll be honest, I don't know, because it's not one that I really dealt with, especially if you're talking about somebody maybe convicted of domestic violence. So that's a little bit different. But
Yeah,
see, I think that kind of goes into what the issue is.
There's not a
here.
one-size-fits-all
right,
approach.
Exactly. And
So-
then that may be the same issue, but I think that the same fervor maybe that those on the other side have about that issue, we'd like to see that
Right.
over here too. Certainly a person who has a felony of, you got a felony hit and run, may not need to have their gun rights lost. A person who has a felony shoplifting.
Right.
But at the same time, that person who has a felony shoplifting certainly shouldn't lose their right to vote either. So I think those are the keys.
Okay, thank you.
If I could jump back in, Mr. Chairman, very quickly. One of the things we talked about is that if you look at other countries around the world, or ancient Greece even, there is some felony disenfranchisement, but it's very limited. And it's limited in a rational way to the nature of the offense, kind of just like the whip was saying. So if you commit treason, which was the only thing, as we heard testimony today, treason was the only thing before black people got the right to vote and disenfranchisement happened again in the late 1800s. It was the only thing you could get it taken away for. Crimes related to like fraud and interfering with the electoral process. So if there's that rational relationship, I could easily understand why we'd want to have felony disenfranchisement that's related. And to the whip's point, that might make sense for guns too. But that would require a lot of reform where we are in a mindset where we're connecting the nature of the offense to the disenfranchisement as opposed to just doing like a blanket disenfranchisement for everything. So I think we would, in theory, be supportive of that kind of an approach. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the authors and the witnesses, and I'm grateful for the conversation. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you very much.